I've been hesitant to put out a video about Street Fighter 6. The game isn't out as of recording this video, and I didn't have the ability to pull footage from the game to illustrate what I wanted to show. Well, that was until tons of creators got their hands on the game and we were able to answer all the questions we might have. It was never that I didn't have anything to say, trust me, I've got lots. But now I've got stuff to show for it, so I want to talk about something with you guys real quick. Street Fighter 6 has been on the receiving end of almost endless praise. People are even willing to grind a demo of 2 characters they'll never actually use for hours. Why is that? Why is it that everyone who touches the game walks away with a smile on their face and a general feeling of satisfaction? Why does Street Fighter 6 feel so good? Well, this is kind of a layered question, but luckily the main team behind Street Fighter 6 has already broken it down for us. In many interviews, they bring up 4 C's that they want to pay attention to while making the game. These 4 C's break down the Street Fighter 6 experience at its core, and I guarantee that at least one of them is at the heart of any person's praise for the game. For this video, we're going to talk about 3 of the 4 since I've got a lot to say about the last one. Let's jump right in. Before we get into the video, I want to say thanks to everyone for supporting the channel so far. We're getting close to 10,000 subs, so I'd greatly appreciate it if you consider subscribing and dropping a comment or a like if you enjoy the video. With that out of the way, let's get back into it. The first C is choice. Well, I guess we've always had the ability to choose. The word in this case is most likely depth of choice. There's 2 kinds of depth we see in fighting games in this regard. There's natural depth, and then there's the artificial. Artificial depth is things like locking your tools behind a choice before a match starts. Games like Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm tried this route, and it failed miserably. Fans hate to have to choose tools over others, as it limits their options for no real reason other than to artificially make them feel like they have a choice. Street Fighter V fell into this trap hard with its V-system mechanics. At first, players didn't even have a choice since every character only had 1 V-trigger and 1 V-skill. Then, by Champion Edition, players could choose 1 option for each, which could help them in certain matchups. The only problem was, for a lot of characters it didn't really matter. Some characters have 1 V-trigger that solves all of their problems, and the V-skill system was built in a way that some characters get a lot out of it, and others get almost nothing. This changed over time and is much better now than it was, but it's still just an illusion of choice. GameDeveloper.com has a great article depicting the layers of depth, and I want to go over them quickly to drive this point home. The first thing to clear up is that complexity and depth are not the same thing. Complexity describes the influence of the variables in a game. Fighting games are incredibly varied, so it's pretty fair to say they are complex.
I didn't know that happened.
No 2 matches go the same way, and since your opponent is another human or an advanced computer, there's an immense number of things to keep track of.
I'm gonna block this whack ass mix up.
Depth refers to how much the game allows players to make meaningful and creative choices in a game. It's important for a game to have both complexity and depth if it wants to remain competitive for an extended period of time, and the 2 need to be balanced. The best way to bolster depth in your game is to carefully balance your game mechanics. Street Fighter V was flawed in so many regards around its mechanics. For example, oftentimes you could beat your opponent for 60% of a round, then the opponent would activate V-trigger and force a mix-up on you. In this position specifically, you have the option to try and guess the mix, reversal, or V-reversal. If you choose V-reversal, you might get the opponent off of you, but they're still going to be in V-trigger. Now they can force their pressure on you even more, and you might lose because you were winning. It doesn't really make much sense. Street Fighter 6, however, has taken a very different approach. If your character struggles against zoners, parry their projectiles. If your character didn't have a reversal before, everyone has level 1 invincible supers, and most armored reversals seem buffed. Essentially, the universal mechanics now allow characters to have more unique interactions in their good and bad matchups, which turns Street Fighter on its head pretty much. The game developer article ends with questions for devs to tell if their games have depth, but I think it's also a great thing for players to remember when making decisions in a game. Are there multiple solutions to a challenge? Do the conditions of the play space affect the challenge? Are there degrees of risk and reward? As you understand the depth of a game, these are questions you naturally start to ask yourself. And with Street Fighter 6, I've barely played it, and I've been asking myself these questions non-stop. For example, here's what I was doing for most of the beta while learning Kimberly. There's 4 different routes for the same dive kick punish, but they vary depending on my meter, stage positioning, and levels of difficulty. I had to keep track of all of these factors while playing, and Street Fighter V just really didn't have that unless it was a very specific instance. Even the choice of how to play the game is given to the player. Modern controls are an incredible addition, in my opinion, because of how naturally they help ease people into understanding a character. They're not in easy mode as they come with drawbacks of their own, but playing on this control scheme is something the designers of Street Fighter 6 want you to experiment with. This is an example of complexity not equaling depth, because there's tons of simple things in Street Fighter 6 that come with lots of depth.
だけど思想はマジでしっかりしてるから、土台のね。そう。だからこのゲームは俺はまあ心配しなくていいと思う。発売したばっかの時に、ここちょっといびつだねっていうことはあるかもしれないけど、まあ大丈夫。根がいい子なんで、この子は。この子は根がいい子なんで大丈夫だと思います。
The second C is content. This is a personal favorite of mine because there's almost no other fighting games that have gone to the extent that Street Fighter 6 has. Well, I say that, but there is one that I've somehow avoided mentioning on this channel until now, but it's Mortal Kombat. Arguably, Street Fighter might be the more globally recognizable IP due to it defining the fighting game genre, but Mortal Kombat has outsold Street Fighter so many times at this point, and a great question to ask about that is, why? Well, if we look at the list, Mortal Kombat and Smash are at the top selling games, a tier above everybody else. Smash, it makes sense. It's accessible, recognizable characters from decades of games, and it's on a family-friendly console, opening sales up to younger audiences. But Mortal Kombat is probably the most violent fighting game franchise that has traditional motion inputs, so how can it sell so well? Based on the name of this chapter, I'm sure you can guess where I'm going with this. It's the content. If I were to boot up an NRS game right now, there's more for me to do than just get into an online battle. There's the crypt, the towers, hours of story mode, customization of movesets and character costumes, and tons of other things. On top of that, Mortal Kombat games have pretty good tutorials, in-game tools to hone your craft, and dial-in combos which are great for new players to learn the basics and apply them in single-player modes before they have to fight a ranked match. I know people might cringe at me for saying this, but with the director of Mortal Kombat, Ed Boon, you can see the passion he has for the universe he's created and the mythos of it all.
You're the Weezer of game development, Mr. Boon.
He's put so much love into the franchise and wants players to lose themselves in it. Single-player mode is an obvious extension of that, which we don't see in a lot of fighting games. In the past, that wasn't really a problem since many players wouldn't reach the end of a fighting game's arcade mode, and when they did, a few slides and images would suffice. But nowadays, with most people playing fighting games on console, that really just doesn't slide, and evidently, it doesn't sell as well. So Street Fighter 6 has introduced World Tour mode, which might be the biggest single-player mode for major fighting games yet. World Tour will allow players to travel to different parts of the world, customize a character from the ground up, interact with classic Street Fighter characters, and much more that I'm sure we've not seen yet. This combined with the accessibility from modern controls will make Street Fighter 6 easy to approach and keep the audience engaged. It appeals to a whole different audience than past Street Fighter games. It's no secret that Street Fighter V had a botched launch, and that turned away potentially millions of players, me included early on. The next installment in the franchise has made it overtly clear that they're not going to make that same mistake, and I can't wait to see what lies ahead. C number 3 is character. Now, one could argue this belongs under content, but in my opinion, this is possibly the most important factor for getting people in the door for a new Street Fighter game. A solid identity is what makes people remember something. You can recognize a Van Gogh through its brilliant color and specific stroke style. We can recognize a jingle with just 4 notes. And with Street Fighter, up until recently, I don't think it's really stood out. I've had people walk into a room and see me playing Street Fighter 4 or 5 and ask me if I'm playing Mortal Kombat or Smash. Obviously, these people don't know video games that well, but Street Fighter is one of the most recognizable IPs in the world, and they would never guess that.
Hey there, everybody. This is Ryu from Streets.
There's a reason that so many collaborations with Street Fighter are hinged on their Street Fighter 2 aesthetic and characters. Those are the things that have persisted over the decades, and to outsiders, that's what Street Fighter still is. But I think 6 has the opportunity to change that. The team behind this game have gotten back to their roots and added their own flares as well. The infusion of hip-hop culture and music with the original touches of graffiti from Street Fighter 1 fit together seamlessly, creating a fighting game that looks unlike any other. Paint splats on the walls and ground when a drive impact hits. The game's theme is unlike any fighting game theme I've heard come out recently, and the characters themselves, oh man. I don't think there's ever been such an overall positive reception to a cast of new characters like this in a fighting game before. The character designers went off with how involved the costumes are, and they made sure to do their research so everything was respectful and genuine. There's a ballet dancer slash model slash judoka, an urban ninja with ties to the franchise's past and future, and whatever Marissa is doing here that people seem to love so much. It's all so fresh and colorful, especially when I genuinely can't remember what Remy and Abel were even about from past games. As for the old characters, we get to see them in new lights. For instance, we get to see Guile let his hair down, literally. Chun-Li pretty much hadn't aged since Street Fighter 2, but Street Fighter 6 acknowledges this and shows her on the next step in her journey. Both Chun and Ryu have reached their goals and are developing the next generation. A big issue for me with these characters that I love, like Honda, is that his story hasn't gone anywhere since he entered the world of Street Fighter. He's been the same dude who just likes sumo wrestling and baths for 30 years. But in Street Fighter 6, he's got something else going on. He's moved on to opening up a Chanko stew shop, and who knows what else the game will have in store for us. And in terms of his design, the team really leaned into his love for sumo and his tendency for showmanship. He's got so much personality just in his win pose.
No one can stop me!
A great way to keep people engaged in your game is to make them care about the characters they're interacting with. In previous games, characters felt more like tools to manipulate in battle, which was a mistake. Street Fighter 6 has remedied this by letting us see their personalities as we, the player, become more in sync with them. Like, look at their parries. Something as small as every character's parries are even interesting and offer insight into what they're all about. The other half of the character discussion is that so far, every character seems strong and fun. It's hard to say how things are going to shake out because of all the mechanics, but just from the footage we've seen and the betas, every character seems to be the strongest versions of themselves yet. They've got new moves, old moves that didn't make the cut in other games, as well as unique game plans so they don't play the same. Street Fighter V took away so many options from characters and straight up restricted them for what seemed like no reason.
That's simply not possible. Why isn't it possible? It's just not. Why not, you stupid bastard?
Luckily, in Street Fighter 6, these restrictions seem to no longer be there. Overall, combo restrictions are less prevalent, and it's led to a sense of freedom and curiosity that makes you want to keep coming back for more and exploring all the game has to offer.
That worked.
Obviously, there's a lot of other factors leading to why Street Fighter 6 feels so good, like stage design, dynamic cameras, and tons of side games to mess around in, but I wanted to focus on the main talking points that the directors focus on in their interviews. Street Fighter 6 turning out so promising is no mistake. These guys have poured blood, sweat, and tears into making what most of us could only have dreamed of at this point 12 months ago. The game isn't out yet, but already so many of us are just excited to get our hands on it and grind countless hours away. But I think some kind of thanks are in order. Sure, they're selling us a product that we're gonna buy and fill Capcom's wallets with, but I don't think that they see it that way. They've had their ears to the community and given us what we want. They're fueling the competitive fire of fighting games as a genre and pushing our favorite games into a more modern design and model. I hope this trend only continues as newer games are announced in this post-Street Fighter 6 era and the whole community can grow together. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
逆に現場の皆さんとかはすごく糧になってより気合が入ってより良いものをもっと作ろうっていうマインドになるので、そういった意味でこれからも常に向上して進んでいくようなチーム、あとプロモーションとかチーム全体でやっていけたらなって思ってます。